Hello and welcome to the very first episode of our podcast from the Food and Agriculture Center for Science Education. I'm Brian Byerly, your host for today, and I'm excited to have you join us for a conversation that merges science education, science in general, research, and agriculture in new and innovative ways. Today, we're kicking off our series by diving deep into the intersection of these fields and exploring how we can use agricultural context to enrich education across diverse learning environments. So this podcast is dedicated to exploring what we kind of call the science through the lens of food systems and agriculture, an approach that integrates agricultural science into broader STEM education to make learning more meaningful and relevant for a diverse range of students. By seeing science through the lens of agriculture, we're providing students with real-world context of basic chemistry, physics, biology, so that they can see the direct connection between the science principles and the practices in their daily lives. For those of you who are new to this community, the Food and Agriculture Center for Science Education, or as we call it, the Center, is a platform of the American Farm Bureau Foundation for Agriculture, and it's dedicated to enhancing scientific and agricultural literacy. The mission of the center is to inspire learners to embrace science and creating a food-secure world. And we do this by expanding access to agriculture through a range of innovative programs and resources. Our vision, our commitment is that every student in every school will have an opportunity to engage with the food system and agriculture as part of their K-12 science education. Today's episode is produced by Relevant Classroom, a division of Vivaic Incorporated, through generous support from the National Dairy Council. All right, so let's get started. So our very first guest, I'm thrilled to introduce you to somebody who I've known now for about 3 years. Our paths connected about 3 years ago. And his name is Professor Emeritus John McNamara from Washington State University. John has a 50-year career in agricultural sciences and education, from basic metabolism to professional development of teachers and the NGSS frameworks. His research work on genetics and metabolism in farm animals and his education work in companion animal nutrition has been recognized worldwide with several awards. He's worked with the Washington Science Teachers Association, as well as the National Science Teaching Association, the Washington State Academy of Sciences, and the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine on several aspects of agricultural and food systems, as well as science education. So I couldn't be more thrilled to bring John into the conversation. Really and truly, for the last 3 years, he's served somewhat as a mentor to me as I've learned about agriculture, food systems, and the deep science inherent. So he provides a unique position in both education and scientific worlds. He's extraordinarily qualified for this discussion of how we can bridge gaps between agricultural science and general education. So John, thank you for joining me. Just a quick question as we lead into this conversation. Just your background is tremendous. I'm just always thrilled about the conversations we have, and I learn something new all the time. Can you tell our audience a little bit about how you found your passion in agriculture?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for those kind words. Hello, everybody, to all of our friends in the dairy and agricultural industries, friends in education, teachers, parents who may be watching this. So a few years ago, 1968, I'll let you do the math, I had an opportunity to go out to a long-standing family friend's farm in Western Illinois and learn how to milk cows. And I joke, and it's not really a joke, about it was pretty much the same as 1868, except we did have electricity. So we had bucket milkers, and I just loved cows. I honestly loved working with them. Went off to college, Iowa State University, University of Illinois. As I said, I was looking for a nice farm girl to marry and start working on a farm, but they weren't having any of that. And I realized how hard farm work was. So I became an ag professor. I became a professor of animal sciences and have had a wonderful time here at Washington State for the last 40 plus years, primarily working with dairy. Also did some work with sows. And as Brian mentioned, because of the nature of our student population, a lot of work on teaching about dogs and cats, and honestly using pets as a way to get students knowledgeable and interested in agricultural animals as well. So it started a while ago, and I have had the opportunity to have some impact, and so I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Thanks, John. That's inspiring to think about. I mean, the intersection of science and education in your life is something that is truly very unique. So you've got this unique perspective of how applied science can be used to drive learning in the classroom. And I think that's the nature of our conversation today as we get into it. Um, I want to start by talking a little bit about recently you wrote an article for the Center called Basic Science Education Develops Lifelong Learners in Agriculture and Food Systems, which emphasizes the need to integrate agricultural topics into the general science education, which is exactly the nature of our conversation. Can you share a little bit more about how you think this can help make science education more relevant to diverse populations?
Sure. And so you bring up a point. In general terms, our school system, there's a lot of things that they're asked to do. And one is to teach students in basic science, physics, biology, chemistry, earth sciences, environmental sciences. Also, there's programs that you're familiar with, the career and technical education, what used to be called ag tech or vo-ag, those types of courses. And for many districts, they're separate entities. And some districts are just too small to have a large science department or an ag department, those types of things. So it's become a little bit of a disconnect. And that's what we're trying to reconnect here. That everything taught in basic science courses, and biology is a big example. Almost all high school students take a biology class. The examples used in that class tend to be animals or plants in the wild, so to speak. And they are interesting. I mean, it's fun to think about, wildebeest on the Serengeti and things like that. But everything we do in biology, obviously, is included in agriculture and vice versa. So without creating an entire new curriculum, we can very simply provide teachers examples of anything from the birth of a calf on up to ice cream and the health benefits of dairy in science classes. So that's really what we're talking about here. How can we provide teachers with a seamless way, a painless way, if you will, to include agricultural examples in what they teach every day?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That point is so perfect for this conversation, and that idea of integration and convergence, integrating topics so that students can see exactly why am I learning these things? Why do I need to learn about these things? And the intersection of agriculture being kind of like our engineering of the natural world to meet our needs. It's something that speaks to everybody. You mentioned something about differences and misconceptions, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on, because I hear this from both sides at this point. Sometimes I'm working in the industry side of things, agricultural side of things, gathering knowledge and information data from researchers in the space, as well as with science educators, and both tend to say kind of the same thing. Either the agriculturalists are saying, I wish people understood more about agriculture, people being generally, I'm speaking very generally here. And then teachers also saying, well, my students are far removed from agriculture. It's not relevant to their lives. Specifically hear this from teachers in suburban areas or urban areas. So what about education at the primary and secondary level schools? What role do you see? How can you expand on this integration,
Sure.
particularly to benefit urban and suburban students?
Sure. So, that's kind of an easy one in the sense of just stop and think for a minute. Everybody eats. Most people like to eat, and they have certain foods that they like or dislike. They may have religious principles that direct their nutrition. They may have local opportunities or lack of opportunities. One of the examples I always use, hopefully somebody from North Dakota is listening in. I always use the example of Minot, North Dakota. How are they going to get fresh vegetables? Those types of things. So there are examples galore that we can use, again, for teachers to relate to their students. So any school anywhere, start a class to say, what are your 2 favorite foods? And that will give you all sorts of examples on any of the biological processes, right? Later on, in high school primarily, and the curricula that we use in science has some very specific goals for students about using evidence to make decisions. So after they've had some of the basics, so you ask them, what have you heard about big ag? What have you heard about food and agriculture? And I guarantee you there will be all sorts of examples in health, environment, climate change, those types of things. Now you've got a conversation starter that you can help these students learn how to use the scientific evidence that's there of how we produce food, how we store food, those types of things. The health benefits of dairy products, of high quality milk protein and other, calcium and things like that. So there's so many examples, Brian, that we don't really need to complicate this in that sense.
Right.
We
Right.
do need to have the conversation. That's really what we're talking about. We need to have that conversation, and then we can move forward.
I love that. And that's a perfect segue into my next question. But before I do jump into that, if we're talking favorite foods, I vote ice cream. Let's talk about the chemistry of ice cream. That sounds pretty interesting to me.
Exactly.
But let's dive a little bit deeper into that conversation part. I'm thinking a little bit about the K-12 framework from the National Academies, and one of the big goals of the K-12 framework is to have an informed citizenship that can engage in scientific dialogue. And I think this is exactly at the heart of what we're talking about. I share this very often with folks on the agricultural and industry side that, look, our goals are the same. Education's goals and agricultural goals ultimately are driving towards being more learned about these systems in agriculture so that we can engage in those types of conversation from a point of fact as opposed to misconceptions. And so in your article, you mention a little bit about how some consumers might cling to misconceptions even when they're presented with evidence to the contrary. And I think we see that all the time, especially with conflicting claims on social media, which I like to call the shadow curriculum. You're constantly inundated with just quite frankly, very conflicting information that both seem very relevant, very authoritative. And so I get wondering your thoughts on what strategies do you believe are most effective for agricultural professionals to help support that dialogue in the general society?
Sure. Thank you, Brian. And it's so important because, over time, a lot of these topics, issues, they become politicized when they have fairly easy solutions, so to speak. So you talked about the frameworks for science education. This is something, and many people will refer to this as the NGSS, or the Next Generation Science Standards. And immediately what happens is someone will say, oh no, we're changing everything again. And that's not the case. Industry asks, agricultural industry asks, technical industries asks, the universities and colleges and trade organizations ask for a system that helps students become problem solvers, problem identifiers. So we know, right? We know all this stuff about biology and chemistry and physics and environment. We know that. How do we help students continue to come back to evidence-based decisions? Part of that is my good friend and colleague at University of Washington, Phil Bell. Those of you in the ag industries may never have heard of him. Those of you in science ed have. He said something very, very simple. Science is a cultural activity. Okay, the science of agriculture is what drives our economy. It drives our health decisions. It has everything to do with infrastructure, those types of things, getting food to market, keeping food whole, all of those types of things. So there's so many examples that we can use, but it comes down, Brian, to having that conversation. There's examples of that. There's good examples of agricultural industries interacting with schools. However, many of them tend to be focused in, well, we want more agriculturalists, right? We want people to work in the agricultural industries. That's important, but it's a small percentage. What we have is every single student, whether they graduate from high school or not, or whatever trade they go into, will eat. They will make decisions about regulations. They will make decisions about health. We want them based on scientific facts and principles and research. And I can say because we've worked with a long time, is that the quality and safety practices of our food production system are outstanding. They are used in other industries for process control and quality standards. So we have a good story to tell in that sense. And so, I've been kind of looking at the clock, and I'm a fast talker. I never quite know when to end, but I think we've got a little time here for some detail, is that it really doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you're in dairy or corn or whatever it might be, you have facts, verifiable facts that are used by regulatory agencies, the federal government, industry leaders, quality control. Those facts are used every day. So we have examples that students can use. How do we keep your ice cream cold? Okay.
Right.
Why do we say have 3 serves of dairy a day? I mean, there is a wonderful story right there. I mean, there is a story about vitamin D and calcium and protein. I mean, Nobel Prizes given for that, outstanding science. So anyway, the answer to your question is, let's have that conversation. It starts at it starts at the parent level, the school board level, the teacher level, the local industry level, those types of things, of belaying that idea that students who have lived totally and will live totally in an urban environment, that they don't care about food, that they don't know about food. Let's get rid of that misperception and say, okay, how can we help them continue to be good decision makers about food? So there's the medium length answer, Brian.
I think that's perfect. It's a great answer. I could listen to that all day. I think it's you're spot on. Not only just being responsible and critical thinkers and decision makers, as you mentioned, also being potential innovators in this field to continue that research and that good work. I think that's I think it's really inspiring to think about a future that has a bit more knowledge and understanding about these systems. I want to come around a little bit to, in the earlier part of our conversation, you made a really good point about integration, and you were talking about how things had kind of gotten siloed a little bit. And I want to call out just part of our mission to go into science education really falls on the fact that I think it's, last time I checked, I think it's about 97 to 98% of all students in America, public, private, or charter, complete a biology course by the time that they finish high school. So that's a huge opportunity right there to integrate. That's a huge opportunity to bring these topics in. And part of the way of doing that is the next generation science standards, as you mentioned. So I'm going to come back around to that. You've highlighted how the NGSS have been the foundation of making science more personal and adaptable. How might this relate to the idea of, let's say, given your experience, what are some common challenges that educators might face when trying to apply NGSS in the context of agricultural education, and how can they overcome those challenges?
Sure. And so, Brian, I'm going to throw you a little curveball here, but, this is talking about, convergence education. When we use words like integration, progression, convergence, those types of things, what do we mean? So my answer, I'm going to give the answer a couple of different ways. One, for our friends in the agricultural industry, those of you who work in some aspect of agriculture, from on the farm all the way up to retail and everything involved in it. and those of you who are teachers and educators or education policy people. Okay? So the education folks have a charter to follow by their state. We expect students to have some knowledge and ability in these areas. Okay? Biology. Gee golly, what do they need to understand? Genetics, nutrition, food, photosynthesis. Okay, so every wonderful school kid comes home, runs home from school as an elementary school student. Hey, Mom, Dad, did you know that everything we eat comes from the sun? And did you know that soil is important for what we eat? Those types of things. Okay. So, there's examples out there that we can provide of, well, what about photosynthesis in corn plants? What about photosynthesis in wheat? What about genetics of dairy cattle? By golly, okay. The cows that I milked in 1968, we were happy if they filled 1 8-gallon bucket a day. Okay. And now your average cow is producing 70 to 90 pounds of milk, 10 gallons a day through genetics, through nutrition. So there is no shortage of examples.
Mm-hmm.
Now for our teacher folks, okay? I don't do ag. I'm not in ag. Our kids don't understand this, or that's farming. Okay, let's have that conversation we were talking about a minute ago. But you want them to understand genetics, right? Okay. What organisms have we used for 10,000 plus years to improve our lot in life? Okay. We have been genetically selecting animals. We've been genetically selecting plants. It's a beautiful, rich history of human discovery. And we couldn't explain it scientifically until really in my lifetime. Okay. Now, for some of you, that might be long. 70 years is a pretty small amount of time on an evolutionary scale. So we have so many different positive examples that we can use there of integrating our agricultural knowledge and processing so that, and you have to look at it this way. So again, for our teacher friends, if you look at the progression of the knowledge, it builds on simple things that young kids are looking at. What are cows? Why is a cow not a pig? All the way up to what are the consequences? Now, here's for all of you involved, so have you heard this one lately? What are the consequences of agriculture on our environment? Okay. Agriculture uses natural resources. And
right.
for the most part, we use them very wisely.
Right.
How can we continue to improve on that? So, Brian, again, there's a hopefully not too long answer on that, but I really hope it got people thinking about, okay, if I'm in the ag industry, I want to have good conversations with teachers and educators. If I'm a teacher and educator, I want to have good conversations with people who literally make the world a better place and providing healthy food. So let's keep working on that.
Yeah, that conversation needs to continue happening. I agree with you 100% in classrooms. I love that you didn't shy away from, we need to look at this from a problem solution lens. Let's talk about those things and get people involved in the sense making of those problems. It's a perfect setup, honestly, John, for wrapping up this conversation. I have a couple of just kind of questions about some larger topics. So I'm thinking about resilience and sustainability, right? I mean, everywhere I turn, there is, whether you're kind of out in the world, everyone has a sustainable development goal or everyone has vision for their sustainable efforts. I know educators are working towards what does sustainability look like in terms of science education and how can we help kids think about a resilient and adaptable future. So from your unique perspective and your history with agriculture, as we consider the future of agriculture, resilience and sustainability are clearly critical themes. How can agricultural education, or more specifically science education with an agricultural context, evolve to better prepare students and professionals to contribute to the sustainability and resilience of our food system?
Sure. Well, thank you for that. And I have to kind of make a joke. What do we call a self-deprecating joke? I might be unique, but I'm just like the other guy. You know, I've seen a lot of the world. I've seen a lot of agriculture. And again, from the mom and dad, literally the mom and dad who work 18 hours a day running their farm to get their kids to go to college. And the kid says, I never want to do that again. I'm getting as far away from ag as I can. To the student who grew up in Chicago in the 50s and 60s and had the opportunity to see farming and to see what farming is and what farming does and how that relates to your everyday life and how producers. So about 30 years ago, there was a study done from the massive amount of data we've collected in the agricultural statistical services on what a family farm was in dairy. And for those of you who work in dairy, can you get this? So this was 30 years ago, that in order to raise a family of four, mom, dad, two kids, on the median American income, it required 750 milking cows 30 years ago. Now, how many students in X big city get this picture of mom and dad working hard on the farm? Well, they are working hard on the farm, but it's a big farm. Okay? When you throw out that number, 750 cows, oh my gosh, that's so many cows. Okay? Why? What are some of the reasons why we hit farms like that? And then how well they work. And that's what, one of my wrap-ups here today is, for those of you in the ag world, you're familiar with the fact that the federal government has a plethora of programs to help you in your decision-making. Data capture programs, building infrastructure, working with high-tech systems, working with animal genetics, plant genetics, these types of things that have come from private and publicly funded research. You know that those are things that you do every day. From the science teacher standpoint, okay, a lot of our conversation is, how do you get students engaged? I have a hard time keeping my students engaged, okay? Quite honestly, do you think they're going to be more engaged if you're talking about wildebeests and whales? Or if you're talking about the price of food or their favorite foods, or does in fact ice cream cause diabetes? Okay. You have so much information there, day-to-day information. How many times have my mom says this is XYZ, this is bad, this is good. What's the data there? What's the evidence there? There's so many different examples. So I encourage all of you that have taken the opportunity to and the time out of your lives to listen to us today, follow up with me directly, follow up with Brian. We can give you some of these examples. I could go on and on, but we really, really know. And when you look at the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, when you look at the federal agencies, these are good, caring people who want the best opportunities for your children and for students who are going to work in food, work in agriculture. As Brian said, be the innovators that bring new ideas. How can we do things better? They're going to be the ones who make decisions in the store, in the voting booth. How do we make things better? And here's an opportunity for us to provide them the facts and figures and learning skills that they need to make those decisions.
I love that. John, that's a perfect wrap up. And thank you today for having this conversation. I think that opportunity, just the complexity of food systems from local, national, global perspectives, the variety of production methods and why we do the things we do in agriculture and the trade-offs inherent to that, just really does round out sustainability and resilience. as a scientific topic and pursuit, and that can be done through agriculture and the production of our food, fiber, and fuel. So, John, I really do appreciate your conversation and your time this morning. Really and honestly appreciate it. I've had a great time chatting with you about this, as always, and I look forward to the next time, my friend. Thank you.